is excused for tonight's meeting. First on the agenda are the city updates. Ms. Solano.
Mr. Chairman, at City Council and Mayor Gradisar, I have only one or two updates this evening. And the first is to share with you the retirement of our city clerk, Brenda Armijo, effective April the 1st. She'd notified the mayor earlier this morning, and she will, however, be on medical leave effective today through the end of the month. I spoke with her briefly today, and she was feeling fine, and hopefully can speak with her later tomorrow or the next day. She did express what honor it had been for her to serve as your city clerk. So I wanted you to join me in wishing her well, and we'll be hearing from her again soon. The second update is that I finished compiling the goal summary from the City Council's work retreat and forwarded that information to both Chairman Aliff and City Council President Atencio, and I'll be waiting for them to give us all the direction on where we go from here. The minutes to that retreat will be forthcoming as well, hopefully this evening. And the last update that I have today is just an update on vaccinations as we watch them continue to increase in the city. In a press release from the health department earlier this afternoon, they reported that there are now in the city 22,600 first doses of the vaccination that have been administered and 14,331 second doses. So making progress every week that goes by. And I'm open for any questions or directions on additional information to provide to council next week. Thank you.
Thank you for your report. And thank you for getting those the goals set over to us. I got those late this afternoon, and we'll get them out to the rest of council here in the next few days. And then we can all, I think what we'll do, Ms. Solano, is schedule a work session around those again in the near future once everybody has your report, and then we can get together as a council and try and figure out our goals. So I appreciate that. Any questions for the mayor's office? Any comments? Seeing nobody, we'll go on to number 2 on our agenda, which is the renamed Starlight Park for Laura Schwarzenberger. I'm going to call to the podium Ms. Janice Madrid, Ms. Jeanette Garcia, and City of Pueblo Parks and Recreation Director Stephen Meyer. Welcome, everybody. Who's going to give us our report?
Is Janice there?
I'm here. Janice. Oh, Janice.
Yeah, is Janice there?
We don't see her, Stephen.
Okay. She, Janice Madrid contacted me about, I don't know, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, talking to me about renaming the Starlight Park over at south side of town off 78 there, and rename it to Laura's Park. She put together a little PowerPoint, so she may expect to not be on here until 10 till, I think was the time slot on the agenda. But I'll just kind of give you the quick version. She wanted to name the park since Laura grew up here in Pueblo, and dedicate the playground. She wanted to also raise funds to replace the playground. And I think we'll work with her on replacing the sign inside the park there. I checked with the Public Works and the Attorney's Office and Planning Department. Nobody really could find any reasons why we couldn't change the name. Sometimes when parks are subdivided or such, that they are dedicated to the city based on a certain, name or something. But this one has no reason that we need to hang on to the Starlight name. So really don't see an issue with renaming that park at this time.
Daryl, did you have the PowerPoint? You want to put it up?
If they show up at 10 till, are we going to? They are scheduled at 5. Yeah, they're scheduled for 5:50 on the agenda. You guys want to wait for them? They come right now.
Janice and Jeanette? Yeah, come on up to the front here. We'll turn your microphones on. We're ahead of schedule. We knew you were coming, so we sped it up so we could get right to you. No, nobody said that. Nobody said that. Hey, thank both of you for coming. Stephen Meyer just gave us an overview of what was about your report, but I know you have a PowerPoint you want to go through, and I know that you guys want to give your presentation. So we'll. Thank you. No, you get.
Mr. Chairman, council members, and Mayor Gratishai. My name is Janet, and I am the chair for the Love of Laura Committee, and this is one of my committee members, Jeanette Garcia. We are grateful for providing this time to share our proposal with you. My goal is to memorialize former Pueblo FBI agent Laura Schwarzenberg.
Excuse me, I can hardly hear her.
Can you pull the microphone maybe a little closer to you?
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Laura is a hometown hero. At the age of 43, tragically on February 2nd, 2021, FBI Special Agent Laura Schwarzenberger was one of the 2 FBI agents killed in Sunrise, Florida, while executing a federal search warrant in a case involving child pornography and violent crimes against children. Laura was born and raised in Pueblo and lived on the south side. Her father was a pharmacist for the Colorado Mental Health Institute, and she grew up on Starlight Drive. Her parents were Jim and Dixie Schwarzenberger, who are now both deceased. The second born of 4 children, her older sister is deceased. Her younger sister lives in the Denver area, while her brother lives on the East Coast. Laura attended John Newman Catholic School from kindergarten until 8th grade. She then attended South High, where she was a member of the National Honor Society, the golf and swim team, winter sports queen, academic letter winner, and state qualifier in swimming, where she also competed as a diver. She graduated in 1996. Former classmates state that Laura was an amazing friend all through high school. Always had that beautiful smile on her face, and she was a wonderful teammate and friend in high school. Laura was very talented diver and valued member of our swim team. Laura was also very smart. She married Jason Baca, a graduate of East High School, who is also a Pueblo native. Both of her in-laws are also deceased. With both her parents and her in-laws deceased, as her closest living relative in Pueblo, I am committed to making sure our community knows of the honors Laura for her ultimate sacrifice and her contribution she made to our country because of her upbringing in our great city and the values she carried with her. This has led to this presentation. When I first met Laura in 2021, when she began dating my nephew, whom I have grown very close to when his mother, my sister, died at a young age, Laura told me all she ever wanted to be was an FBI agent. This career goal came true and the newlyweds left Pueblo. In 2005, Laura begins her employment with the Federal Bureau of Investigations and was stationed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. At that time, if you worked for the FBI, you were not allowed to be assigned in the same state you grew up in. In 2010, she was reassigned to Miami, Florida. She was on the Cargo Theft Task Force during her time in Miami. She was a member of the Evidence Response Team and the Underwater Search and Rescue Team. Who knew her diving skills she demonstrated at South High School would also become a talent she would use in her career. She was a Professional Association of Diving Instructors, dive master, and a PADI open water instructor who served as a public safety diver beginning in May of 2013. She completed 17 underwater forensic searches. She used her diving skills on an international trip, like when she helped with the diving rescue for the earthquake victims in Haiti. Later in her career, she's transferred to the Violent Crimes and Fugitive Task Force, eventually finding her calling and what she called her dream job, Violent Crimes Against Children's Task Force. She's the first female to be named part of an FBI SWAT team. Laura was among the first responders following the horrific Stonemore Douglas High School shooting incident, also known as Parkland shooting, in February 2018. As a loving mother herself of two sons, Laura had tremendous passion and enthusiasm for her work and was determined to make a difference in the lives of children. She often took time to speak to students. As Albert Carvlejo, superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, the third largest school district in the United States, shared, she sacrificed her life to protect youths. From speaking to students about cyber safety to fighting crimes against children, her hard work did not go unrecognized. She received the LEO Award for Federal Agent of the Year in 2016 and receives Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year Award in both 2016 and 2019. Friends in Florida State said Laura was a hero to me. She helped directly rescue and indirectly rescue so many kids. She saved so many kids just by putting bad people away. She had this bright, bubbly light, despite how dark her job was. She was a light of hope. A lot of people burn out in this division, but she never did. This was her calling, just to protect kids. She lived it every minute of every day. The purpose of our presentation today is to seek City Council's approval to rename Starlight Park to Laura's Park, located at Surfwood Lane and Starlight Drive. This park is down the street from the house Laura grew up in. As you can see from the pictures, there is an open space, some trees for shade, a few wooden picnic tables, and an old set of playground equipment used primarily constructed is metal, like the metal slide or the metal merry-go-round, which the Consumer Product Safety Commission often recommends against due to its safety concerns. Most playgrounds equipment becomes installed today is made of heavy plastic. If the park is renamed, our committee would seek to partner with a nonprofit organization to raise funds for the purpose of modernizing this equipment, similar to the inclusive playground recently installed at Bessemer Academy. We have thought of the possibility of a concrete path that would lead to the playground so our senior living across the street could travel across the street to play with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Of course, all of this depends upon the amount of funds raised, and your approval is remaining this park and our committee working with the Parks and Recreation Department on what upgrades could occur. Now, you've heard about Laura as a native of Pueblo and as an FBI agent, but I want you to know Laura in her most important role. Laura was also an avid CrossFitter, where her favorite gym, CrossFit created Live Like Laura t-shirts to fundraise money for her sons shortly after her death. Laura was involved in lacrosse activities for her boys and loved serving as an unofficial photographer for the Parkland Redhawks and Stealth lacrosse games. Laura loved camping with her family in the Colorado mountains, was a talented artist who loved to draw, paint, and do crafts with her boys. In fact, we talked about 3 or 4 times a week on our mutual love for crafts and her family. Despite all of her accolades and achievements in life, she would say her greatest accomplishment in life was being married to the love of her life, Pueblo native Jason Baca, and having their 2 boys, Gavin and Damon. While gathering input recently from neighbors who reside near the park to see if they would support a park name change, I met the man whose home is directly adjacent to the park. Mr. Frazier, who signed a letter supporting our initiative, shared how his children went to school with Laura and how friends had invited them to a candlelight vigil in honor of her a week after her death. Our family had no idea this had occurred. What a blessing, in a way, a sign of approval from Laura for me when he said the vigil was held at Starlight Park. We are fortunate to be recognized as the home of heroes, originally because of the 4 individuals from Pueblo who have received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and we are all proud to honor these brave men. But we now have the opportunity to honor a heroine from Pueblo, an FBI special agent who also made her mark fighting a different war, a war to protect our children. Your sincere consideration to rename Starlight Park to Laura's Park in honor of her legacy, her fight to protect children, her contributions, and the ultimate sacrifice as a native of a Puebloan is deeply appreciated. We thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation today. And if there are any questions or additional comments we can provide, please ask. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for your report, Councilor Flores.
No,
Yeah, did you have anything to add, or you're here to add?
no, my understanding is that an inclusive playground is not, an inclusive playground is something that is not quite available yet to so many of our students and our children and our seniors, and just young adults that live in our city limits. There are new playgrounds that have been developed, like Lehigh Park a couple years ago, where the group of citizens got together and helped construct that. And then Pueblo West has an inclusive playground, and inclusive is not just wheelchair accessible for those people who do not have the physical capability to enjoy a playground. It is something that does a tactile, kinesthetic kinds of opportunities, so little baby climbing walls, as well as big xylophones that the kids can go ahead and mark on. A lot of tactile opportunities for kids, as well as having wider pathways so that people can go down simultaneously, as well as having an opportunity for little enclosed areas so that if I'm not yet comfortable in playing with somebody else as I work my way through the process of cooperative play, and there's all the steps that we go through as children, there's a place for them to still feel secure and be part of that. So when we were talking and saw that Brookdale senior citizens were right across the street, and having known somebody that's been there before, what a great opportunity to we've even tried to figure out how to contact them to maybe become partners with us and helping to secure funding for a pathway that they can go and enjoy the park with their grandchildren and great grandchildren as well. So we have great aspirations for what could happen, but this of course is the first step in getting City Council and the City of Pueblo's approval to rename the park and then work from there.
Thank you. before I began, because I did have a chance to talk to our president, Larry Atencio, and he gave me some information he wanted me to share. But I think I speak for the mayor, myself, the entire city council, and extending our sympathy to you, Mr. And if you would extend our sympathy to Mr. Baca and the two boys, we really would appreciate it. I just wanted to tell you that. What a great loss to the community, not only to the FBI community in the United States, but to our city. And I certainly am very supportive of this. But I did want to relay what Larry had to say since he couldn't be here this evening. He was 100% behind this. He wanted to make sure that we also helped you with a I don't know if you'd call it a donation or a contribution to starting this fund of $2,000. And I told Larry that I would bring it forth to the city council tonight. That would have put on as a resolution probably at our next meeting, because this is not an official meeting. And at this stage, I know that there's some other plans that you have at the convention center also, and that has to go through its own cycle, but we're going to deal this evening. But I think that Stephen, Mr. Meyer, the director of the Parks and Rec, he might be able to walk us through after I end here to give us a sequence of how this gets done, because there will be the other issue is the state highway, depending on whether or not we need their permission. So there's a little bit of homework to be done as far as the logistics of getting the park named officially, and then having the stone changed that actually would have her name. It's interesting. You just want to call the park Laura. You don't want to add her last name. Is there a reason for that?
I think little kids that go to the park would probably have a hard time telling their parents, can we go to the Swords park? Or could we go to Laura's park?
Right.
And she was all for little kids. When she would speak in schools, they would call her Special Agent Laura. So that's it. Yeah, that's the name I would like to name.
Oh, that's great. And then as far as, can we ask Stephen to kind of walk us through the sequence? Mr. Meyer, could you kind of help us with that?
Sure, you bet. So it's pretty quite simple. We did it with Lake Minnequa when we renamed it to include the Veterans Park, but it's basically an ordinance we'll run, we'll prepare it and run it to city council, 2 readings, I believe, and it'll change the name from Starlight Park to Laura's Park. And that's pretty much the only thing we have to do legal wise. Then I'll work with her on how what kind of sign we want to put up, or how we want to adjust the signage. That's just a rock out there right now. I don't know if we want to do another rock with engraving that identifies it as Laura's Park, or if we want to do a different kind of sign. So I'll work with them on that, about getting that name change actually physically done at the park. And then as we work, talk to her about the playground facility and the sidewalk, we'll work with them on planning that effort out too with them, and do whatever we can to help them on that.
Perfect, thank you. Then lastly, I wanted to volunteer, I guess, being I wear several hats. And one of the hats that I wear is president of the Latino Chamber Foundation. And we have acted as fiscal agent with several other organizations. And if, as you plan there, if you think that you're going to need a separate fiscal agent, because you do have to produce some financial information when the city does provide money. And that would be very simple, because that would kind of solve one of your problems. And all they would do is just hold money in trust under a specific designated purpose, and it would be short-lived, because once everything is done, then the account will be closed. But I offered that, and I told Larry that I would bring that up too, so that potentially could be. I still have to get it approved through their board, But I think in this particular case, it's such a worthy cause that that's not going to be an issue. So that's what Larry had instructed me to do, and that's the end of my report.
Councilor Winter.
Yeah, I fully support this. I mean, what a tragic thing to happen. So sad. So I think it'll be a great dedication to Laura. Thanks for doing this.
Councilor Brown.
I would defer to you, but would Special Agent Laura be an appropriate way to name it? That's just a thought.
Yes. I'll talk with her husband and see which he would, what he would like. But yeah, that's an idea.
Councilor Schilling.
Looking for direction on the $2,000 tonight. Larry's original thought was that we should at least be thinking about contributing and getting the fund going. As I understand, you need to raise close to $150,000. And so that's your big charge right now. And I'd also would take, the advice of the council if they think that maybe the amount should be more. Okay, I'm all for the 2,000 if we're looking for direction.
Councilor Aguilera.
Really an honor to be associated with somebody like this, and for us to have a female who is actually a big hero. I'm sure that the FBI would recognize that, but I think the FBI would also should be an advocate for helping finance this deal. And they always have money to be able to help our police department, both to encourage women to enter law enforcement and to give them her good name. So really, Jeanette, thanks for doing this, and thanks for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a no-brainer. It's not like this is something you have to really mull over and decide whether this is a good idea or not. I would say that here's a group that is wanting to come in and, all they're asking is for us to change the name of a park. But then they're also saying we're willing to raise $150,000 and partner with the city to improve a city park. I think it's pretty chintzy on our part that we would only think that $2,000 was good seed money for that. I think that we should really step up, and, whether it's out of council contingencies or whatever. But I think this is like, in my opinion, this is a $10,000 investment on our part, simply because of what you're doing. I mean, this is an incredible deal. So I'm going to ask for two things. I mean, let's give the city direction on, is everybody okay with moving ahead with naming the park? Dennis?
Yes.
Bob, yes. Yes. No, we're just direction. You're in favor of it. And Lori, I know you're in favor of it, correct?
Sure. Absolutely.
Councilman Brown?
I participated in one of the other parks, and the city got donated some of the labor, so maybe that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Hey, Stephen, what would be the partnership if they're raising $150,000 to redo this playground and put the sidewalk in, or the pathway in? What's the city committing to?
We need to work with her on the master plan of what the improvements they're talking about, the walkway, the playground areas, what type of playground they're thinking of, and look at that budget. Install, we can install it with our staff. Our staff are all certified installers. We've done 4 or 5 now playgrounds that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, replacing playgrounds completely. And so we can look at that installation. Installation is usually about half the cost. So that may save a lot of money on their playground wishes. So we can commit to that.
I'm sorry. One of the guys who has helped to develop these kind of activities is Bill Swick. He really, and he knows how to raise money too. He raised most of the money that we used to remodel this building. And Bill Swick is really, he could really help you make this deal first class operation. Bill Swick, he retired from the city. He periodically helps the city and other.
Oh, sorry.
Councilor Shelley.
We have $2 amounts on the table. And as Stephen pointed out, the city, it costs us a lot of money to build a park. And I think the in-kind service, I'd rather go with Genesis at 2,000 to start and find out what our total in-kind is going to be. I bet it's going to exceed the $10,000 mark. So I'd rather start with the seed money of 2,000, and then we can always give money. It's my thought. So I'd really like to see what Stephen comes up with, what our real costs are going to be, because it's not cheap. Thank you.
Dennis, how do you feel about the money?
Well, I wanted to ask Jeanette, preliminary budgeting on this. Had you anticipated labor to be done?
No, that's fantastic news. One of my former teachers helped do an inclusive playground using GoCo Colorado monies out in Pueblo West, and she worked with me during that time. She since moved over to Bessemer Academy, where she did the same thing. And so getting the cost figures from her, it was, just so Steve knows, it was $40,000 to install the playground at Bessemer Academy. So as Mr. Schilling said, you might have an in-kind that exceeds the 10,000. So if we look at the space that's available there and don't plan on enlarging it very much, the person she worked with was from Miracle, and I believe that was one of the vendors that Janice who all does playground equipment. And so to hear that we have certified installers that work for the city already, that's probably out of the $150,000 is going to save it right there. I believe she quoted me $120 for the equipment itself. And looking at what we saw at Bessemer Academy with the size that's currently the playground area there, it might be a very, very natural fit. I'm just really feeling like Laura's blessing all of this to put it in, because the amount of space at Bessemer Academy is almost the same amount of space that we're going to want to replace the equipment that's a little outdated at Starlight Park, currently Starlight Park. So it's, and it can be customized to what the needs are as well.
Bob just mentioned, just to begin with, because if there's no additional capital that's needed, we still have that flexibility. If we need to do something to top it off at the end, the contribution of the city installation becomes very small. And that's so.
Any other questions? Or
Yeah, Mark?
Yes, Councilor Winter.
Stephen, I don't know if you're familiar with these kind of the draw with this old playground equipment, but there's actually a whole book published on it. There's people that travel all over seeking this old playground equipment. So it might be an option to go to Saving Places and have them donate money to the new playground and keep the old. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I
Yeah.
could check with Saving Places for you.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that, so that's interesting. But
Yeah, it is.
Great point. Great point. Anything else you'd like to add before we move on?
No, I mean, this has been well received. We totally appreciate all of you helping to kickstart the fundraising as well. We're looking at getting it out to the FBI family as well. I've just learned possibilities from a lawyer in Florida that said the GoFundMe might work because it's not the money going to pay for Janice's new house, but that it's something that will give back to the city. So the investment of the city with potential for other opportunities. We're ready to write grants as well to GoCo, as well as Rawlings, El Pomar, Poverty Foundation, wherever, to get this going for children, especially if it's like we're thinking would be one of the first ones within the city limits for public use. We wanted to put pictures up of the Bessemer playground, but I was not happy. I was too leery about getting onto the playground and taking pictures while the kids were all in session and Angela coming out wanting to know what we thought we were doing scouting without checking in to the office first.
Well, please keep us posted, and when you're ready to do the fundraising, be sure and reach out to each and every one of us, because I'm sure we'd all like to give personally to make this happen. So that's an important thing. Councilor Shelley?
We need direction here. You got 2 for 2,000. You need.
No, everybody agreed. We went down the road.
Okay. We went down the road on the 2,000.
I'm for 10,000, but I'll
Okay,
do whatever they want to
So
do.
we do have consensus on the 2.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Ayla,
Yes, sir.
we'll have that, we'll get that ordinance started first meeting in April.
Sounds good. And I'll leave it up to the council president, Councilor Flores, to come forward with a resolution on the money.
Yep, and the only thing I wanted to say is that if you need, as you move forward with either applying for grants or getting support from the FBI or whatever, you may need a letter from the city as to what our commitment is after we pass the resolution. So I'll make sure that we have a letter put together as to what our commitment is. It could jumpstart your fundraising abilities. And it probably should be a letter that's signed by the mayor, the president, both the mayor and the president. So we'll get that.
And attached to your packets also, Janice did start to inform the residents of Starlight, including knocking on the door where Laura grew up. And that was just an amazing response when the lady heard she was living in the house of a hero with her own little girls, right? Yes.
Hey, thank you very much for coming tonight. We sure
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you
what
all.
you're doing for our community.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thanks for what you all do for us too.
Okay, we'll go on to number 3 on the agenda, which is the Animal Enforcement Code Amendments. For the podium, Ms. Vinda and Mr. Gloss. Do we have a report from someone?
We do, Mr. Councilman. Let me see. We have a PowerPoint presentation. I believe Daryl will pull that up when he has a moment. There we go. So the submitted ordinance amends the Pueblo Municipal Code with regards to animals and animal control, imposes new requirements and penalties. And tonight, myself, Trevor Gloss, Assistant City Attorney, and Lindsay Vigna, Assistant Director of Animal Law Enforcement, Humane Society of the Pikes Peak Region, will be going through this presentation with you. This is a comprehensive update to the police regulations concerning animals, mostly in Chapter 4, Title 11 of the Pueblo Municipal Code. Portions of the Animal Control Code have not been updated in several years, where some sections are the same as originally enacted in 1957. The amendments here are intended to update the code to address the needs and desires of the community in new situations that have arisen in recent years. By working closely with animal law enforcement and surveying animal codes in other jurisdictions, we have attempted to make the code as current and comprehensive as possible. This is our roadmap for tonight. We'll go through each of these. I will go through the current code, what it says, the proposed language, and then Lindsay will jump in with why these changes are being made and what we're hoping to get out of it. So multiple animal licenses, authority for animal control officers, dangerous and potentially dangerous animals, leashes and restraining, increased fees to deal with cost of impoundment and care, rabies, the poisoning of animals, penalties, cruelty to animals, animal carcasses, rendering aid, enjoyment, liability, prohibited animals, licensing fees, and then other assorted changes before we move on to questions. These are all just arranged with in the same order as the municipal code. First, multiple animal licenses. Currently, the city requires kennel licenses for dogs and category licenses for cats, where a person cannot own more than 4 of either without such a license. This is designed to prevent nuisances and to ensure that animals are kept healthy and well cared for, and the health department has to sign off on any such licenses. The proposed language would add a new license to cover any type of animal, where if you're going to have more than 4 of any one type of animal or more than 8 animals total, you would need to get a multiple animal license. There, of course, it will be an exception for land zoned agricultural, so this would not affect any farms. I'm not sure if Lindsay had anything on this one.
Yes, and I just wanted to add, this is an area we felt needed to be addressed. There are often times where animal law enforcement, we come in contact with individuals that have animals that aren't currently regulated, or they're regulated, but they're kind of falling in between the cracks of what our ordinances can address and what PACFA, the Pet Animal Care Facilities Act, can address. And I'm speaking about those individuals that have, let's say, for example, ferrets. Ferrets are becoming quite popular, or rats. I think those of you that have been on council for any length of time remembers our issue with the rats. This license not only enables animal law enforcement to kind of keep track of these properties, but also ensures that the proper authority of the Pueblo City County Health Department is regulating these licenses.
Thank you. Moving on, for authority for animal control officers. The powers of animal control officers are not well defined in our code. They have the authority to investigate violations, impound animals, and issue tickets, but it doesn't explicitly state that in a number of different areas. So the proposed language clarifies that officers have these powers to investigate violations, impound animals, and issue summons complaints. And it also defines the process by which animal control officers can request a warrant from municipal court to seize an animal in case it's needed to present a danger to the public, or where the animal itself is a danger or is in danger or suffering cruelty.
Yeah, and just to add on this, so as the ordinance reads now, it is very clear that animal control officers have the ability to impound when there's a vicious animal violation. That is not as clearly defined when we're talking about welfare concerns. And so this is why, although we felt, that our authority was implicit, people expected us to have that authority, we just want to make sure that it's clearly defined. In addition to, we want to be sensitive to search and seizure type issues, and which is why we wanted to spell out the process of a municipal warrant.
Dangerous and potentially dangerous animals. Currently, the city has a vicious animal code, which includes, and an animal can be found vicious for even apparent attitudes, where if it looks like it could attack a person. There's no less severe option that could be applied in the proper circumstances. So an animal could either be found vicious or nothing at all, and that's a little difficult. If an animal is found vicious, it requires a protective order and an escape-proof enclosure, although our code doesn't really define what constitutes an escape-proof enclosure. The proposed changes would change the term vicious to dangerous to match state law. Dangerous animals would include dogs that cause serious bodily injury, where serious bodily injury is defined to mean bruises, cuts, and anything more serious. It creates a lesser class of violation for potentially dangerous animals, which covers more of the apparent attitudes and any less serious injuries, such as maybe a scrape. Animals can be declassified from potentially dangerous status, which is nice for pet owners if they do get convicted of that. It would create a special license for each type of dangerous and potentially dangerous animals. It defines escape-proof enclosure so that animal control officers and people who are convicted have a better idea of what that constitutes. And the language creates a prohibition on bringing in animals that were adjudicated dangerous in other jurisdictions. So, for example, if someone had a dog that was found vicious in Denver under state law, they couldn't move here without at least getting a special license for that animal and complying with the protective order and having an escape-proof enclosure for that animal.
Thanks, Trevor. That last comment, really want to drill in on. We have had several situations where we are notified from an outside agency where an animal that has been adjudicated dangerous in, outside of our county is being brought into the city. As it stands now, we appreciate being put on notice, but there's not a whole lot we can do. And so, we feel like this ordinance change really not only helps us kind of keep track again of these animals that have demonstrated those tendencies, but it's also, a good safety net, if you will, for not only our officers, but general law enforcement when we're having to contact these individuals on these properties. Like Trevor mentioned, as it stands now, escape-proof enclosure, which is mandated upon adjudication of a vicious conviction. It's not really clear and it's open to interpretation. And so with this revision, it kind of outlines that, we don't consider a shed in the backyard escape-proof. But this basically mandates that an escape-proof enclosure will include not only a secure top and bottom, but the height of the containment has to be at least 6 feet. Like he mentioned, really, and I should back up, the initial push for us to work on these revisions came from what is now the vicious animal ordinances. It's just, as it stands now, it's a very broad ordinance that to where basically you can have an animal that growls or maybe shows their teeth at someone and makes them feel threatened. And essentially that would fit the elements, that would meet the elements of the vicious animal charge. What this does is obviously separates those charges and gives us another tool that we can use when we're dealing with those less serious situations.
Moving on to PMC 11415, leashes and restraining. This is the City of Pueblo's current leash law, prohibiting pet owners from letting their animals run around at large. Animals must either be on a person's property or leashed. The proposed language would create an exception for dog parks and more clearly states that animal enforcement officers can impound at-large dogs.
And again, this is just making it more clearly defined. And just want to make mention that when this ordinance was originally written, dog parks weren't a thing. And clearly we're seeing that they're becoming more and more popular.
Increased fees to deal with the cost of impoundments and care. The redemption amounts for impoundment are currently set at $30 for the first one, $40 for the second, and $60 for the third and every impoundment thereafter. Daily care and feeding of the animals is set at $10 to $15, depending upon the animal, dog or cat, and whether it is required to be quarantined. The proposed language increases these fees to $40 for the first impoundment, $50 for the second, and $75 for the third, and each impoundment thereafter within 12 months. The proposed daily care and feeding is increasing $5 to $15 or $20, depending upon the animal and its quarantine status. And then the animal owners will be required to prepay for care if the animal is impounded for a quarantine, vicious or dangerous status, or for cruelty to the animal. These fees were last updated about 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, obviously the demand for providing top quality care and control to these animals that are in our custody requires that we address the increase. The proposed increases are also in line with other impoundment fees across the state. And I did want to make note that HSPPR always makes every effort possible to reunite pets with their owners, and will continue to work with owners on reducing and waiving fees when appropriate.
Rabies. The current language allows the mayor to issue a proclamation requiring all animals to be confined to their premises unless such animals are leashed and have a muzzle. Any animal at large is seized and impounded by the proper authorities, and all cats must be vaccinated during that time, although cats are required to be vaccinated per other provisions of the code as well. The proposed language still allows for this proclamation and confining of animals, but it expands the vaccination of cats to include the vaccination of all animals that could be infected by rabies, including ferrets. If an animal poses an imminent danger due to rabies, the mayor may declare this animal to be a nuisance and immediately impounded or euthanized and tested. It also creates a mechanism by which the municipal court may issue a warrant for the animal in accordance with Rule 241 of the Colorado Municipal Court Rules, which are promulgated by the state Supreme Court. And the city will not be liable for the cost of impoundment, euthanization, or testing of these animals. Those costs can compound quickly.
Certainly. And I will just add to that. I'll rack your brains and your memory again. If any of you can recall an issue we had, it was back in 2018, and it was involving a dog that was exposed to another dog within the home that died and tested positive for rabies. It was a really big challenge for not only our agency, but the police department was out there in addition to the Pueblo City County Health Department. And there was really a lot of misinterpretation of some of the laws on who would have the ability to impound that animal. And what this does is it just kind of gives a general layout that it, like Trevor mentioned, if an animal poses an imminent danger due to rabies, the mayor may declare the animal to be a nuisance and immediately impounded or euthanized and tested. And sorry, let me just add one more thing to that. Of course, in situations involving rabies, we will always act under the direction of the health officials.
The poisoning of animals, it's unlawful in a Class 1 municipal offense, meaning that not only can you have upwards of $1,000 fine, but also upwards of a year in jail. For any person to poison any wild or domesticated animal, including dogs and other household pets, or to distribute any poison in any manner whatsoever with the intent or for the purpose of poisoning any wild or domesticated animal. This does not apply to licensed veterinarians, nor to the use of poisons designed to kill insects or wild prairie dogs, rats, and mice. The proposed language makes it clear that providing marijuana products, alcohol products, or illegal substances to an animal, or failing to provide care if the animal is exposed to those, constitutes poisoning.
Yeah, and this is something, obviously, it's unfortunate that we have to address, but with the popularity of marijuana, we've seen several cases where dogs have ingested marijuana and ultimately, became very sick. We also had a couple of cases recently where we've picked up dogs displaying some very concerning neurotic behavior, and they've tested positive for having methamphetamines in their system. So with this ordinance, it also allows for, not only is it, it's it's a violation, a poisoning violation, but it's also a violation if they fail to provide adequate veterinary care for an animal that, that has ingested those illegal substances.
Penalties. Our penalties provision currently lists the default for violations of our animal ordinances as a Class 2 municipal offense, which means upwards of $1,000 fine is possible. Although the court normally sets it lower, I believe the standard is 200 to 300, depending upon the violation, and no time in jail. If a person is convicted of having a vicious animal, they are required to pay all related expenses, including shelter, food, veterinary expenses, and such other expenses as may be required. The penalty provision also imposes the $25 Keep Pueblo Beautiful surcharge for convictions related to different nuisance provisions, such as at-large animals, improper cooping of fowl, the accumulation of manure, and so on. The proposed language would state that cruelty to animal charges must be kept separate and not aggregated, so that would require a harsher penalty in the end. After hearing on cruelty, an animal may be forfeited or declared abandoned by order of the municipal court, and the court may order that the defendant pay for all rehabilitation costs for the animal. If the court determines that rehabilitation is remote or impossible, the court may order humane euthanasia of the dog at the owner's expense and in accordance with Chapter 4.5 of this Title 11, which places strict restrictions on when an animal can be euthanized.
Yeah, and the only thing I have to add to that is, in the event we're dealing with an aggravated, especially on a cruelty situation, we're looking more at the charging falling under the state level. And if it meets the elements of going higher than that into a felony level, we're working with local law enforcement and the district attorney's office.
The next slide, cruelty to animals, where it's unlawful in a Class 1 municipal offense. So again, jail time is possible for any person to commit or assist another in committing any act of cruelty, harassment, abandonment, or torture, or to any animal, or to cause such animal to be wounded, mutilated, strangled, or inhumanely killed. An act of cruelty includes beating, mistreating, tormenting, overloading, overworking, neglecting, failing to adequately feed, or otherwise abusing any animal. Ownership of the animal is not a valid defense, and it is unlawful in a Class 1 municipal offense for any person to cause, instigate, or permit any dogfight or combat between animals or animals and humans. So the first change is a couple of these have now been made felonies at the state level, which per state law means that we cannot prosecute them at the municipal level. Basically because any jail time is greater than a year and the city doesn't have the power to impose jail time that extends that far. So the torture, mutilation, and dogfighting will have to be removed for that reason. There will be, the proposed language includes additional authority for animal control officers to impound cruelly treated animals for the animal's safety, cost to be paid by the animal's owner. It would be unlawful to leave an animal in an unattended vehicle without adequate ventilation or in any manner which subjects the animal to extreme temperatures. The animal control officer may enter the vehicle to retrieve the animal if they reasonably believe that the animal's life is in danger and the officer is unable to locate or contact the owner, or if other exigent circumstances exist. Tethering of an animal leads to under-socialization and greater aggression in an animal, threatening public health and safety. It would become unlawful to tether an animal for more than 4 hours in any 24-hour period. There would also be other restrictions on tethering, such as not leaving the animal out in bad weather, such as sleet or snow. There would also be a new requirement that owners provide minimum care to their animals, which includes food, water, shelter, and veterinary care, which really just better defines the current restriction on how failing to adequately feed an animal constitutes abuse.
Yeah, and the one thing I will add about the tethering when we're talking about, there's a lot of research and a lot of studies, especially in the animal welfare world, when we're talking about dogs that live their entire existence on a chain. And when you're looking at some of these cases, especially the beginning of the year, where I brought to you all about how We're not necessarily seeing more incidents of aggression, but the severity of those cases is getting quite concerning. This is certainly part of that, is that, we do currently see a lot of animals that are, living on chains. In addition to just kind of the time allowance, we actually just had a case this morning that, an animal that is on a chain and not monitored regularly has, the tendency to get tangled on the chain. Or, we respond to the calls where dogs are hanging, where they're being choked by the chain. And so we felt like this was a good introduction and better for the city of Pueblo.
Animal carcasses. It is currently a nuisance and unlawful for a person to permit the carcass of any animal to remain upon that person's property for more than 24 hours following the death of that animal. The proposed language would make it unlawful to dump or abandon any dead animal on any public or private property within the city. If an animal dies on public property, an animal control officer or law enforcement officer may remove it and dispose of it, and the animal's owner would be responsible for the disposal fees and any associated penalties.
And the only thing I have to add to this is that, there have been several times where deceased owned animals have been dumped on public property. And I will, especially for this group this evening, if a person's pet passes away, they do have several options. Yes, it is illegal to bury their animal within the city limits of Pueblo, but they certainly can seek out cremation through the animal shelter, even to the point where they have the option of claiming their pet's ashes.
Rendering aid. It is unlawful for a person to abandon any dog or other small animal, or to fail to stop and attend to such an animal if it's been stricken by a vehicle, or to in any way maim or harm such an animal. The proposed language would remove the dog or other small language, making it unlawful to abandon any pet or to fail to attend to such an animal if it's injured, if it's stricken by a car. This is just to broaden the language because there are many different types of pets nowadays, more than just dogs and cats.
And I will just add to that rendering aid really is inclusive of sometimes just a simple phone call, just reporting the incident.
Enjoyment, PMC 11429 is a proposed provision, entirely new, where if a person is convicted of and sentenced for a violation of having a dangerous or potentially dangerous animal, failing to properly restrain their animal and allowing it to be at large, or cruelty to the animal, the municipal court may prohibit that person from owning any other animals for up to 1 year. This is kind of like the authority of the animal control officers, where the court implicitly has this power, but we would like to have it in the code as well.
And it is something that municipal court has already done. We have had cases where, we're advocating for stricter penalties such as this because we're dealing with a repeat offender.
Liability, PMC 11430 is another new provision where the city and its employees and agents and the Pueblo Animal Shelter and its employees shall be immune from liability for any actions or enforcement taken pursuant to this chapter, which basically means we will hold them harmless for doing their jobs and making sure that they're complying with the law, which the city generally does anyways. Prohibited animals. It is a nuisance and unlawful for a person to keep any wild animals, poisonous snakes, constricting snakes over 12 feet in length, hogs, pigs, swine, sheep, horses, emus, rheas, ostriches, llamas, cattle, peafowl, guinea hens, or goats, except in a public zoo. Except that hogs, pigs, swine, sheep, horses, cattle, peafowl, and guinea hens may be kept on agricultural land, so for farms. It is lawful for a person to possess only one domesticated potbelly pig. The proposed language would increase the limit to 2 domesticated potbelly pigs, but limit them to less than 100 pounds, require them to be registered and licensed with the Pueblo Animal Shelter, spayed or neutered, and vaccinated. The new language would also allow a person to keep up to 2 domesticated miniature goats, again, less than 100 pounds, registered and licensed, neutered, vaccinated, and hornless or debudded, which, and the language would also allow the mayor to order the impoundment of nuisance animals or animals that create a health hazard. So, for example, animals, it could be something as outlandish as a baby crocodile that grows big, or a jungle cat, or something that someone obtained illegally, but it could be something else as well.
Yeah, and what's really valuable about this proposed language is that, like Trevor mentioned, the current ordinance doesn't allow us, or doesn't lay out an option for us to impound when we're dealing with a prohibited animal. So it's sometimes very challenging when you're telling someone, look, you can't have this, in the city limits, at which point some of them will say, okay, well then you take it. Which, at that point they're giving us consent. That's one thing. But if they're not being cooperative, this new proposed language will allow that impoundment. As far as the potbelly pigs, I could speak from experience. I've been doing this work here in Pueblo almost 11 years. And I will tell you, the very few potbelly pig owners that I have come in contact with are usually very passionate and responsible individuals. The potbelly pig, and in addition to the miniature goats, is really a push from the community. I've had several individuals contact me regarding this ordinance change.
Licensing fees. Licenses and tags may be issued for 1 year or up to 3 years. The licensing fee for 1 year is $25 for each dog or cat that has not been spayed or neutered, or $12 for dogs and cats that have. For 3 years, it's only $65 for dogs and cats which have not been spayed or neutered, and $33, averaging at $11 a year for each dog or cat which has been spayed or neutered. There is no licensing fee for service animals or police dogs. The proposed language does not actually change any of these fees, but the licensing officer may waive or discount fees if needed. It creates a $10 late fee for any license or tag expired for more than a week. And it establishes the licensing fee for dangerous or potentially dangerous animals, where it'd be $100 for dangerous and $50 for potentially dangerous.
And this, like Trevor mentioned, we didn't propose to change. We felt that the license fees were adequate the way they are. And, for the late fee, that's really just to cover the costs of really the clerical costs and the renewal of the actual physical tag. And when we're talking about dangerous and potentially dangerous animal licenses, we hear a lot, we're especially in socially conscious sheltering, the need to place stricter penalties or harsher penalties back on the owners of these dangerous dogs. Those fees, if anytime an animal is adjudicated dangerous or vicious, as the current wording, an animal control officer has to not only, follow up on the protection order that we receive from municipal court, but we're conducting follow-ups on the property to ensure that their property is in compliance. So these fees will certainly support that.
Other sort of changes? There are changes throughout the municipal code for consistency, including changing references from vicious to either dangerous or potentially dangerous as applicable. That affects these different code provisions here. There are changes throughout the municipal code from dogs and cats to animals in general. This is just to expand the type of animals that the code applies to, because folks have there are many different types of pets nowadays. We changed the nuisance provision where a dog barking for 5 minutes is considered a nuisance and increase that to 10 minutes. We expanded the language in PMC 11432 so that other fowl and rodents are included therein, prohibiting them from running at large and being kept too close to neighboring properties. That language was really already there, but we just felt like broadening it a bit and making sure that rats and other rodents were included. PMC 11443 would require animals to be licensed by 4 months of age instead of 6 months. This is just to bring it in line with our tag requirements, which requires them to be tagged by 4 months. PMC 1142 would require ferrets to be vaccinated against rabies. And that should cover pretty much all of them.
Thank you for your report. Questions, comments, Councilor Aguilera?
You must have a lot of time on your hands. But I would like to say that it would be my suggestion that we have the opportunity maybe to print this in the paper so that if anybody has any objections, they can tell us what they are right at the beginning. Because we've had some really terrible issues with code enforcement and dogs and all of that over the years. And I certainly don't want to get involved in another contentious period of time dealing with the animal issues. And so I don't know if my fellow councilman would think the same way, but I think you did a really comprehensive thing here. I mean, it's almost too much for us to comprehend all the changes that you want to make. And I think we have to allow the citizens of the Pueblo to respond to your ideas and see if that's what we need for this community and the opportunity to deal with animals here in the city of Pueblo. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wenner?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for that presentation. I just had some questions that I was curious about. How do you plan to enforce the leash chain up law? For no more, is it no more? I'm sorry, what?
The tethering.
The tethering. So no more than 4 hours. I mean, I think that's wonderful to have that there, but I just wonder how.
You know, honestly,
I guess neighbors.
Yeah, well, neighbors, and also the language that's going into it is pretty clear that it's, and Trevor, you can jump in, but it basically says that if an officer observes that animal within, and actually I can pull up unless you have it in front of you, Trevor.
Well, yeah, so the language is creating a rebuttable presumption that if the animal enforcement officer is driving past once an hour, there's the presumption that that animal has been outside for that amount of time. So if they drive past 4 hours in a row and they see the animal tethered there, there's the rebuttable presumption that the animal has been out that entire time, and so the violation that code provision becomes enforceable. The owner can, of course, present evidence to say that, no, I had my animal inside during for an hour or two during that span, or whatever they want to bring up. But that makes it a little bit easier to enforce if you don't have eyewitness testimony from neighbors.
And I think just to jump on that, obviously it's another tool. Of course, within animal law enforcement, as you all know, I mean, our first response to these situations is not to go out and write a citation. It's really to push the education of what it is, and why it's important and why it's detrimental. So.
Do you plan on doing any outreach with that? I think Pueblo really needs this tether law. Do you have any outreach plans with that as far as hitting the schools? Or
I have been contacted by a few of citizens in Pueblo that have really voiced an interest in helping secure some resources, whether that's financial or, when we're talking about individuals that rely solely on a tether or a chain for containment, meaning if they have a dilapidated fence, maybe some help securing the boards or the gates or whatever it is they need. So I'm excited just to kind of see where it goes, especially because like you mentioned, I mean, we have a lot of people and like, Council Aguilera said, we have a lot of people that are invested on pet issues. And, I think, what better way than to try to get everybody involved.
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of people could help with fencing. And then I know that vicious dogs are an issue in Pueblo. Do you find that there's a higher percentage of vicious dogs here in Pueblo than in Colorado Springs, El Paso County? Or is it pretty much the same?
Yeah, I would say probably very similar. The challenge is geographically speaking, still about 70 to 80% of our calls are saturated within the city limits of Pueblo. Whereas, Colorado Springs, they might be driving for 30 to 40 minutes in between those calls. So although I think, the concerning side is that, again, like I mentioned, we're not seeing necessarily more incidents of aggression. Like we're not really seeing more bites, but those bites we are seeing are a lot more severe and are requiring a lot, further and more intensive medical treatment.
Okay. I think that's all. I am curious about another issue, but I don't know if it's appropriate to bring up in front of everyone. I mean, we're not on TV, but I will, I'll call you about that one.
Okay.
Councilor Brown.
Was there any visions in there, or I miss it, about picking up after your dog? Because I walk my dog around the park and I help other people out by picking up after their dogs.
So we do have existing ordinances with regards to cleaning up after your pet. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure the code provision cites you for that, but I know we have them, but they are not being altered in this amendment here.
Correct.
I think it's interesting that humans can defecate wherever they want and they're not required to clean it up. But if dogs do, then you need to clean up your dogs. Just saying.
Thank you, and thank you for the unbelievable amount of tedious work you've done on this. A couple things that I'm sorry, but they really kind of made me laugh. You want to license somebody that's got 10 chickens or 10 rats? I mean, that seems a little ridiculous to have a bunch of chickens running around with the license around their neck. And I don't know how you'd ever find out they have that many chickens. I like the license thing, I guess, the way it is. And want me to license my chickens probably isn't going to happen, or my goats or my pigs. And unless you see them or somebody reports them, I don't know how you know. On the redemption amount, I ran some quick percentages. The lesser thing to be remount, lowest price was $30, and that went up 30%. But then the next offense only goes up 20%, and the third offense only goes up 15%. I'm wondering why you don't. It seems like you have it backwards. It seems like the first time you got to get a break, the second and third times you pay more as a percentage. That's just a thought. Do what you want to with the rest of it. And I thought it was a nice term, and I guess Mr. Gagosic knows all about this, but say we're not liable for test and kill and all that stuff. I don't know how you force them to pay the money. I think it's a good thing to do, but I don't know how the heck you enforce it. If they're not going to pay, they don't pay, and you can't hold them in jail anymore because they didn't pay or they can't pay or something like that in municipal court. And then a question, why on earth would we ever allow a dangerous animal into the city of Pueblo? To me, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Somebody bites up my kid and the city allowed a dangerous animal to come in there, and all of a sudden it's the city's fault. You allowed this animal to come into this city, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm not looking for comments, just thoughts and questions. Thank you.
Councilor Flores.
Just had a comment. Glad that you're dealing with the tethering of animals, but is there anything in there concerning the safety of animals that are left out in cold where they could suffer, and considerably? I didn't hear you touch on that. Is that already in existence?
So that would be included both with the tethering position, provision. It would require the animal to be inside if the temperature goes below a certain amount, certain level, or if there's dangerous weather such as snow or sleet. The minimum care provision in the cruelty section also has where an animal needs adequate shelter and can't be exposed to harsh temperatures like that.
A lot of this is really education, and I think once this is established, I think it would be a good idea to put this on our channel 17, so it replays over and over, because I know some people look at that, and obviously you can't have enough marketing on the do's and don'ts, but I think we should consider putting something on the cable television station.
That's a great idea.
And then I think the main purpose for this is to be in alignment with the state Animal Act, and I think that's a big thing. We have to be in alignment with that. We got in trouble over that previously, so thank you for that, for making those changes. I think they all make sense to a certain point.
I have one more comment, Mark.
I think this was a thorough and thoughtful presentation on the codes. I'm very supportive of everything that has been gone over tonight. But there's one area, and I think, you know, sometimes on council, I feel like I'm on Groundhog Day, and we've talked about this before. But there's one piece of it that really I just can't get past, and that's the potentially dangerous animals. And you know, and the reason I can't get by it is because in theory, every single animal in Pueblo, Colorado is potentially dangerous. And, you know, when you start the arbitrariness of attitude, you know, which is written into the code, just becomes an issue of, you know, somebody from code enforcement believes that my dog is, and we'll just use dogs for argument's sake, is potentially dangerous because he growled at somebody or he showed his teeth to somebody. But I've had the dog for 15 years and he's never bitten anybody. But the reality of it is, according to the code, I could now be forced to register my dog as potentially dangerous, pay the extra fees, go through the process, and from somebody's opinion about he might be dangerous. You know, when a dog bites somebody and is super aggressive and is obviously gone beyond potential, you know, that's easy to understand. But the potentially dangerous, I don't like it. I don't think that it should be in the ordinance. And maybe you can convince me tonight that it's a must-have in this ordinance.
So with regards to that, well, the apparent attitudes that you mentioned there, currently an animal can be found vicious just on that. So the alternative to creating a potentially dangerous animal charge would be removing that language in its entirety, which there are I believe there are 2 or 3 other items where a animal can be found potentially dangerous and not just based on an attitude of attack, which is something we can remove if council thinks that's reasonable.
Well, I'm just saying, if my dog has not attacked anybody, but somebody deems that it might be, I mean, which dog might bite somebody or in certain circumstances? I mean, that's just my point.
Yeah, and there are defenses for, well, if the animal is trying to defend its home or its owner, if it's being provoked, things like that. So there are exceptions and defenses, but I see your point.
I guess we can take that up when the ordinance comes to reading, and you know, I can ask for an amendment if necessary. Councilor Winter.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the license for multiple animals. You know, I know someone personally, a really good friend of mine, that has 4 small dogs, and she ended up with 4 because one of them got dumped on her from the child. But these are all 4 very small dogs that are very well taken care of in a beautiful home, and there's no feces, etc. So I can see reasons for allowing a certain license like that, rather than saying, oh, you need a kennel license when, 4 small dogs is probably not a problem in a household like that. And then when Shilling mentioned the rats, I think it was a couple of years ago, and did you say 2018? Because
Yeah.
I was involved in that. This was over, I think, in Regency,
Mhm.
and the neighbors were complaining, and code enforcement, you would drive by and the front of the house looked beautiful. So, and they couldn't really see in the backyard because it was in a cul-de-sac and another cul-de-sac behind it. But, this went on for a long time. And so I finally drove over there and just rolled down the window, and you could smell the smell immediately. And when I got out of the car, you could really smell it. So I know that I ended up I called the City and County Health Department, and they seem to be helpless. I don't know why. It seems like that would definitely be a health issue. But I ended up calling the Department of Agriculture over it. And I know that you coordinated with them as well to get over there. But this was literally, Bob, this was cage after cage after cage stacked on top of each other in this person's backyard, full of these white rats with little pink eyes. And Lindsay has quite a few stories on this, because they had to go in and clear this out. And there were rats. You would open a drawer and there'd be a couple of rats in there. You'd open a cabinet door and rats would be, running out of there. So you have to have something where where they can say it's a law. You can't have any more than 4 rats. But that was a highly unusual situation. It didn't seem to me that you needed an ordinance from that. It seemed like a no-brainer for the health department to allow you guys to go in there for that. But that was a ridiculous situation. So it just seemed like nobody really wanted to take responsibility for that. So anyway, that's the reason for the limit, Bob.
And Lori, also to piggyback off that, this was, really when we started these discussions, which, I should have added, really, we talked about, we started this, I guess close to 2 years ago. Am I right, Trevor, where we really started looking hard at these ordinances?
Yeah, we've been going back and forth.
And not, certainly not, do we think we need to respond with an ordinance change after, one incident like that, like you said, kind of a freak incident, but we're kind of stumped when we go out to a property and let's say somebody has 4 dogs and 4 cats. And then, which would currently leave them, you can have 4 dogs and 4 cats as it stands now, but then they say, oh, and I have 9 ferrets. Anyone would think, well, that's an awful lot of animals to be on a property. And rather than saying, no, you can't absolutely do that, because like Lori said, there's some people, I've actually met hoarders. There's a few of them that actually do take a lot of pride in taking care of their pets, but ultimately too much is too much. And we, would kind of fall in between the cracks, those situations, because PACFA could, they can regulate if they're breeding these animals and how many litters they're having a year, but ultimately just for the sake of having them, becomes or could become a really big problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then also my friend with the 4 small dogs, she has a neighbor that calls in on her. So that's why it becomes an issue for animal control, because they have to respond to the complaint. And it's like, what do you do in a situation like that? Sure. And I know she was talking about getting a kennel license, which is ridiculous. So I don't know. So that's the reason, Bob.
Thank you. And no more questions. Thank you very much for your report, Lindsay. Thank you for all you do for the city. And
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you guys again.
Thank you all.
Anything else? Okay. We'll go on to item 4 on our agenda, which is the City of Pueblo self-funded medical plan. We'll call the podium Ms. Pacheco, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Sehak, I think. And I apologize if I butchered your last name, Sean.
Oh, that's okay. You were very close.
Good. good, as long as I'm close.
Thanks for having us tonight, Mr. Chair and members of council. Sean and Danny from Hub are joining us via Zoom. They had every intention of being here this evening, but 24 to 45 inches of snow wherever they are, whatever they got, they could not make it down. So they are joining by Zoom this evening. Before I turn it over to Sean and Danny, I wanted to just give a little refresher on why we're coming to you tonight. So back in 2019, we made the decision to move the city's medical plan from fully insured to self-insured. Gives us a lot more flexibility and control over the plan, and we can better control costs. We worked with all the employee unions to make that happen. And of course, council was integral in that because you approved all the ordinance changes, which allowed us to make that change. So we moved to our first year of fully self-insured in 2020. And so the purpose tonight is for Hub to just give you sort of a 30,000 foot view of what happened in 2020 on the plan and how our first year went under a self-insured model. Just as a quick reminder, this is a big cost item for the city and for employees. It's about a $12 million plus per year investment, mostly paid in by the city as the employer. So there's a lot of dollars here. And so managing this as best as we can is very important work. We have about 670 or so employees that take the insurance between city and transit, but we cover about 1,800 lives with their dependents. So that's the population that we're talking about. Big amount of money, but I think that Sean and Danny can share some pretty good news about our first year under self-insured. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danny Talley, who is Senior Vice President with Hub, and Sean Seahawk, who is a consultant on our plan as well from Hub.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And I'm sorry we couldn't be there. We're still digging out. So hopefully in the next few days, we'll be back to normal here. But so yeah, Sean is going to walk through a PowerPoint that we put together that kind of shows some of the good news that Marissa was referencing. You guys had a great year last year on your first year of being self-funded. And we've got some of the numbers to back that up. It was a unique year, as we all know, obviously with COVID-19 hitting, and we know that there were obviously people that did not receive care, elective care, because they weren't able to, and some of those things may have gotten pushed off. We're only into the very beginning of March right now, so it's a little early yet to kind of see how the plan is running this year. But our underwriters at Hub here in Denver are putting those numbers together actually as we speak. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll have another report to kind of see projections possibly for this year. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. She's going to walk through the PowerPoint, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank
Sean,
you, Danny.
all yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll start and wait for the presentation. And if we could start by saying, of all the negative things we can say about 2020, the one positive we can say, it was a great year to go self-funded for your medical plan. So let's jump in. Do I have to? All right. We have a quick overview, as we said. And then if we need more details, we've got the full report available. Next slide, please. All right, and the next. As an overview, again, 2020 was the first year to self-fund the city's medical plan. The plan is administered by Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then highlights of the first year include total medical and pharmacy claims were 8.1 million. 79% of those were medical, 21% were pharmacy. 6 claimants exceeded the $150,000 specific stop loss level with total reimbursements of $396,924. That would lead to net medical and pharmacy claims of just over 7.7 million or $961.95 per employee per month. That net claim results is 15.8% below the 2019 plan year results when we looked per employee per month between the 2 years. So that's why we said 2020 was a good year to move self-funded. Based on these results, the plan had a 71.8% loss ratio when we look at expected claims and 57.4% loss ratio to the maximum claims. Next slide, please. Thank you. As Danny said, the COVID shutdown did impact the plan by suppressing utilization, especially in the months of March through May. If we look at the budget, the annual budget based on our budget accrual rates was 12.7 million, and total plan costs, so that would be claims plus the stop loss premium and the administration fees, were 9.3 million, resulting in that 73.5% loss ratio. The details for those 6 stop loss claimants include those below. So 3 cancers, an alcohol disorder, asthma, and a metabolic disorder. There were 3 employees in this category, 1 child, and 2 spouses. If we look at these total 6 claimants, they represent approximately 16% of total plan costs. And that's a really good year. Generally, we see your top claimants spending between 30 to even sometimes 50% of plan costs. So we consider the 2020 plan year as to have run very well. If we estimate the reserve based on the budget to actual plan cost, the reserve sits at just over $3.37 million. This great 2020 plan year, the results of that, when we worked on the renewal for the 2021 plan year, we looked back at the prior 24 months of claims, and HUB's recommendation was no change to the budget accrual rates and no change to employee contributions for this 2021 plan year. The city approved that recommendation, and so it was no change to budget or employee contribution. So we feel that this, again, was a really positive first year, and we're tracking again this second year, and we'll be looking extensively at the utilization here in a month or two. Any questions?
Thank you. That was a great report. We don't get that very often.
I know, it's so nice to bring good news.
Yeah, Councilor Flores.
Thank you. This is a great report. We should have been in self-insurance mode. That's all this report does for me.
Yeah.
I had a question having to do with COVID. When an employee got COVID, how did you distinguish between whether it was a health insurance claim or a workers' comp claim?
Well, towards the beginning of the pandemic, we had very few that we would have called work-related claims because, as you know, at the very beginning, there was no community spread really at that point. And so the only claims that we had that even remotely resembled a workers' comp claim were those that we knew were direct exposures at work. Not to point on our great fire chief, Barb Huber, but her department was pretty much the only one that made those types of claims. And we knew that those were direct exposures from a positive at work. You know, they live together for 24-hour shifts. So we were pretty certain that that is in fact where they picked up the infection. And so, but other than that, once community spread kicked in, which was not long after that, there really was no definitive way to tie that back to work related. They could have just as easily have picked it up at the grocery store as they did, you know, working with someone. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. I wanted to ask Mr. Talley in regard to whether or not COVID, whether or not this fantastic news is an anomaly because of COVID. We know that if you're a school district, the claims go up exponentially during the summer months because we know that teachers get the elective surgeries at this period. And I know that we had kind of a similar situation in other government type of accounts, but in this particular case, they were basically put on hold by the medical community because they needed to have the beds open. So, is it an anomaly, and is it because of COVID that we got these great results? And if that's yes, then you know, how do we look at the future? That's
yeah. Great question. Yeah, no, absolute great question. And so, yeah, we do believe, obviously, that all plans was a little bit of an anomaly due to COVID-19. And as you had mentioned, people suppressing elective surgeries, things like that. We typically saw that more towards the early part of the year, May, June, July. But then we did start to see people start to get some of those elective surgeries towards the end of summer, closer to the fall. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. Obviously, with self-funding, you have good years and you have bad years, and we always want to keep an eye on that. And so once we get the data from the underwriters now that are doing the workups over the first 3 months of the year, and then even into April and in the beginning of May, we'll have a much better indication of how the plan is running now. And then we'll be able to kind of step back and say, okay, do we believe that most of the people that, had surgeries they put off have gotten those now? Maybe some have not, but we'll have a real good understanding. And that's why I say this year right now, it's still a little early to tell how the plan is running for 2021, because we're really only, by the time claims hit and the time we're able to see the reporting, it's typically a couple month lag. So January and February claims are just starting to hit in March. And so we'll have a much, much better eye on that probably sometime April, May. And obviously we'll report back to all of you and the HR department, Marissa and Bella and her team, once we kind of keep an eye on that. Our goal obviously is to make sure that you have plenty in reserve. And originally we had kind of talked about, a couple good years. Obviously, ultimately it's the city's money to do with what you like, but we want to just make sure that it wasn't a full anomaly this last year. And that's why we believe it's best to have a little bit of a cushion in there until we kind of get through this crazy time we're in, and we have a little bit better idea. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor.
I just have one more question. It's really an accounting question. What did we budget for 2021? Do we know what that amount is?
Well, the rates didn't change, so Charles can jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe it was about 12.7 million is what we're
the same as.
Yeah, because the rates we had a zero change between 20 and 21, so we didn't change that budget number.
The good news for our city is that we have in reserve 3.37 that's sitting there that could be moved back into the general fund if we wanted to.
No, I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's correct. It's been earmarked specifically for benefit costs, and part of the agreement with the employee unions was about that very issue. There was a concern that if we built up a nice reserve by going to a self-insured model, self-funded model, that somehow the city would see that as their private piggy bank to then move back in and use for other purposes. So I believe that we did in the ordinance changes make a very specific statement about this being specifically for medical insurance costs.
So right now we have 15,370,000 to the end of the year of January 1.
Budget wise, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's accumulated obviously through the year through premium contributions by the city and employees, but budgeted, that's what we're planning on putting into the plan. We have that healthy reserve, but as Danny and Sean have both alluded to, you can have 1 year that really, really changes the picture.
Sure.
And so getting that healthy reserve in place is so important to make these plans work. And in a sick kind of twisted way, COVID has allowed us to do that. If it were a normal year, we may not have that kind of a reserve built up at this point in time, but because we've had that lower utilization, we now have a very healthy reserve going into 2021, and hopefully that continues into 2022. The ultimate goal, of course, is to save everybody money, the city and the employees, and not have these, double-digit rate increases on our insurance plans. And this is really the only way that the city was ever going to be able to control that cost without making major plan design changes that the employees were not obviously fans of. So we're very pleased with where we're headed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the important point. We spent the $12.7 million that we budgeted, but $3.3 million of that remains in reserve. And if we have a year like that this year, we'll have $6 million in reserve. And that means basically that the year after that, we will not have to budget or spend that kind of money for those health insurance premiums, because we'll have a lot better idea what the usage is. And if it goes above that, we've got those reserves to take care of. So we'll eventually hope we'll be spending less and less on health insurance.
Right. We get excited about a 0% change, but the reality is by doing this, there may be years where we actually pay less. We have, we reduce premium costs, and that is the whole goal of this. So.
You're right. We need at least a 24-month period to kind of age all these losses.
Absolutely.
Councilor Wenner, do you have anything?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Marissa, thank you. Thank you guys for the report. The great news, you can come back anytime.
All right. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Have a
Have a
great
good evening.
All
Bye-bye.
We'll go to number 5 on the agenda, which is the Pueblo Energy Advisory Commission. I'll call the podium, Mr. Mayor.
That's me. That's me.
It's great to see you tonight.
Pardon me?
It's great to see you tonight.
Good to be here. You have before you, I think, a copy of the proposed ordinance. Just by way of background, let me tell you that the Pueblo Commission on Energy was established in 1977 in the Pueblo Court of Ordinances. It was designed to educate the public and to develop plans for energy shortages back in 1977. And apparently it's been inactive for quite some time. As I began talking about some of the issues that Pueblo faces in terms of the future for energy, I started talking about putting together a citizens committee to sort of pay attention to this stuff and start studying this stuff. And Mr. Kagosic informed me that, well, we have a Pueblo Energy Commission on the books. And so I thought, well, instead of just the mayor setting up an energy commission, we take a look at that ordinance that's there and see if we could work that around a little bit, bring that up to speed, and make that the instrument that we could use for this, what we're going to call now the Pueblo Energy Advisory Commission, which will be made up of Pueblo citizens. So the ordinance before you will change the ordinance that was enacted in 1977 and subsequently amended to create a Pueblo Energy Advisory Commission. It'll consist of 10 to 15 members appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council. The purpose of the commission would be threefold. First, I think, to help the city and advise the city on how we're doing with respect to our goal of becoming 100% renewable energy by 2035. Secondly, to monitor the franchise agreement and agreements with Black Hills Energy. As you know, there are 10 years left on that franchise agreement. And I think there's been some desire in the community to make sure that they're complying with that franchise agreement. And finally, to monitor the Public Utility Commission meetings with respect to energy that might have an impact on Pueblo. And specifically, that's XL Energy and the energy resource plan that they're going to be filing with the Public Utilities Commission later this month that will propose, I believe, the early closure of Comanche 3. So part of what this commission would do would be to study that from Pueblo's perspective and to watch those PUC proceedings so that there is a just transition. Now, this is not the Just Transition Committee, and that'll be a different committee that will set up community-wide that'll be more actively involved. But I think this Citizens Advisory Commission is important to say, okay, this is the impact we think an early closure of Comanche 3 will have on Pueblo, its workforce, its economy, and those kind of things. So that's basically the purpose of amending the ordinance and setting up this Pueblo Energy Advisory Commission. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Sorry, I was reading. Councilor Schilling.
I can hear you snoring. Nick, there's a couple things that's bothered me a little bit. Expense for carrying on commission's activities should be paid out of the funds of the city.
Right. Right.
So that could be 100,000, that could be 2,000. I don't want an answer, but that concerns me that it not get real expensive.
Yeah,
The
well,
Human Relations Commission went from like $1,000 a year, and I don't know what they get now. But anyway, that's a concern I have, and I'm not looking for an answer.
well, before they spend any money, we come back to council. I mean, if there's a need, for instance, if the committee said we need to hire an expert and they wanted to spend money, that's a decision that we bring back to council.
Okay, and down on section 257, it says all departments, city are to cooperate with the commission. What scares me about that is the commission could swamp departments with wanting information.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, it concerns me that they could swamp public works. We want volumes of stuff, or we want volumes of stuff from the police, or volumes of stuff from Black Hills. Or, I mean, I understand wanting information, but it needs to be led in a way where where we're not burying departments looking for information. You know that we have people that call up. One person in particular would swamp the clerk's office with all this other stuff. So just all that sort of thing needs to be watched, so we're not creating a gigantic burden on the department.
No, it will be. The president of the commission will be appointed by the mayor, and we will obviously monitor their activities and will not let them run rampant.
How are you going to pick people with knowledge versus people that have some expertise? I mean, hopefully you're going to pick some people with expertise in the field, and there's got to be a rounding out for, like, the dog people were here before. You fill the whole committee full of them, and we don't get a lot of common sense. So I hope there's going to be people with some expertise.
Well, yeah, no.
Well, you know what, though, the reality is you get people in that are so blinded in tunnel vision. I've used this with you before, Mark. But some people are going to get so blinded in tunnel vision that you can't get anywhere, and that's not the purpose of the commission. The commission is to make good recommendations and be effective.
Well, and yeah, there will be individuals that probably have individual biases, but as a whole, we're hoping to bring to you for confirmation a commission that will be well balanced and representative of the community that will help the community move forward.
We're counting on you.
Well, you're the ones that have to confirm it. So if you don't like who we bring up, say no dice.
You're going to be more in detail information than we'll have unless you produce every bit of detail you've got also.
Well, yeah, we're going to obviously advertise and get as many names as we can, try to get a good commission put together.
It's important. Thank you.
Councilor Flores.
Yeah, I think you said it for me. I want to make sure that if we do put this commission together, that it's balanced, because this is still a raw issue. You still have, even this weekend, you've got editorials constantly, producing information about how badly Pueblo's getting screwed all the time, which I don't agree with. But that's. I'd be interested to see changes that are going to be made. When are we going to see those
changes
to the ordinance? I thought you said there was going to be some.
They're in it, but you hope you have it right in front of you.
I guess I didn't see it.
Yeah, and it'll obviously be in your packet.
Oh, here it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll come back to you. I'll let you read it over.
Okay.
Councilor Winter.
I don't have a problem with it. I really have no comment.
I think that as you, I think that Councilor Schilling brings up a good point. I think if you're going to create this commission, which I don't have any problem with, but when you're talking about putting 15 members on, I think that the membership of the commission should be defined, just like it is on many boards and commissions. You have 2 or 3 members from the energy community. You have 2 or 3 members from the public at large. You have 2 or 3 members, whatever that is, whatever makes sense. The second part of it that is, I don't know, maybe it means nothing, but if you look at the actual ordinance, city council is redacted from every part of it except the ability to approve it. So city council really has no say-so in anything other than approving the commission members and approving this ordinance. And I don't know if that was on purpose, that you don't want city council involved in this at all, or whatever, but it would make sense to me that you had on this commission at least one or two council members that should be spelled out in this, in the membership, like I mentioned earlier.
Well, I don't think we need to spell it out for one or two council people to be members. I mean, if they apply, they'll be appointed and confirmed by the council. You know, I agree that the membership criteria here is pretty broad. I mean, it talks about energy-related interests and community and consumer interests. You know, it's pretty broad. Our goal, obviously, though, is to bring as well balanced a committee as we can find. And, you know, I expect that you'll let me know whether we've accomplished that when we bring them to you for confirmation.
Okay.
I wasn't aware that city council could apply to be on a committee. I can't hear anybody.
It would be my impression, that's why I was bringing it up, that city council would have two seats on the commission.
Right, because we don't apply to be on committees if it's you know, citizens. So we're not, I mean, you can't apply to be on urban renewal or PEDCO or something.
No.
So
Mayor,
it's a legitimate question.
I'm trying to think here. Whether, so let me consider whether or not we need to say two members of city council there, but it would be like urban renewal or any of these other appointments. The mayor would appoint the city council members.
Actually, council president appoints.
No.
From city council.
No.
Oh, he doesn't?
No.
Oh, okay. That changed then.
It did change, yeah.
Yeah, because the last 2 years he's appointed.
Well, this year, last year, the council president appointed. We haven't had an agreement to do that. This year, we went back to what the charter really says, which is that the mayor appoints the members of those commissions. And obviously, we took into consideration the desires of council and the council president. He and I reviewed it before those. I wasn't
asked. Nobody asked me for my desires.
No, the council president and I.
Oh.
And you you agreed to, you passed an ordinance, right?
We did.
Right. So if you disagree with any of those, all you have to say is no.
No, I was talking about city council on boards.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. You passed an ordinance appointing, confirming.
Oh, yeah.
Members on boards.
All right.
Councilor Schilling.
A little picky thing. Here it says the commission shall consist of not less than 10 nor more than 15. Seems to me you need to have an odd number. You can't have 10 because then you got a tie vote and nobody gets anywhere. Seems to me, let's say 9 or 11, just a little picky point, but you got to have an odd number on there or you have a stalled vote.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you know, when everybody's kind of worried about being attacked, maybe this commission should be held in city council chambers so that, I mean, I'm sure the public's welcome to come, so maybe you should have it there.
Who's afraid of being attacked?
Who's afraid of being attacked? Lori, was the question.
Oh, just like verbally attacked. I mean, I had quite a few verbal attacks when all of this was going on with the municipal utilities. So, and you know, it took up council's time, like almost a year of council's time with folks in the chambers. So, the public's welcome to come to any committee. So maybe it would be a good idea for this committee to meet in council chambers so that public can attend that. And then those folks on the committee can answer to the public.
Well, where they're going to meet is something we haven't really thought about at this point. It'd be pretty hard for 15 people to meet in here maybe, but maybe not. So obviously wherever they meet, I think the public will be invited.
I think there's probably a number out there too that you can get too many people on a committee. I always heard some the best number that ever came out, but just something to think, 15 people, that's a lot of kids.
That's a lot, yeah.
Just a thought. Thank you.
You want to be as broad and inclusive as possible.
Chair committee, you do whatever you want.
Well, I'm asking you guys to set up the committee. Or I can just appoint a mayor's committee, but I think this is probably the better way to do it, in as much as we've got that ordinance that's been sitting there waiting for something to happen, I think. So let's get it updated and put in place.
All right, you heard from us. So anything else?
Yeah.
Councilwoman?
So I wanted to bring this up at the end just because we had folks presenting and I'm sure they didn't want to sit through this, but this was a situation that happened today, and Nick is aware of this. We talked on the phone about it, but we had a citizen that complained about a neighbor that was hoarding and causing rodent issues. And so code enforcement went out today and took pictures and then sent those to the mayor's office, which the mayor sent me copies of those photos, and code enforcement didn't seem to think that there was any case. It was obvious in the backyard that there was some hoarding issues going on as far as outdoor storage, kind of up on next to the house. There was snow on the ground, so the only thing you could really see on the ground was a pile of yard debris, like large tree logs that were up against the fence. And then there was a like plastic container that you would put things in that was just kind of in the middle of the yard. And it looked like snow was kind of covering some debris. And then of course a shed there that the neighbor said was kind of full. But the front of the house looked okay. And of course it's snowing, but that's not the issue. The issue is that the complaint was hoarding and rodents. So again, here, issues are not getting addressed all the time, because you drive by, you see the front of the house, you go down the back, you say, oh, I don't have a problem with this, or the mayor thinks that there's worse houses in worse condition in the city, so therefore it's okay for this to happen and we don't investigate it. So there's no way that you could say that was not hoarding, and there's no way that a code enforcement officer could assess if there was a rodent problem or not just by taking a picture from the backyard. So I did notify city and county health department, because they deal a lot with hoarders, and they actually try to get inside the house, because hoarding is a whole other issue. But I just want to bring this up because this is how things kind of slip through the cracks. I just talked about the issue. It's kind of interesting that the rat house came up today, because that was the same situation. That was in a very beautiful neighborhood, like right in the Regency Park area. And it was on a cul-de-sac. So if you drive through there, the house looked beautiful on the outside, and all the other houses in the cul-de-sac were gorgeous, and you couldn't see in the backyard. So code enforcement, didn't really have anything to do with it. So then it gets passed on to animal control, who can't do anything because there's no laws against having X amount of rats. So and then we have the health department that didn't want to step up and do anything either. When to me, it's obvious it was an issue of the owner's health and safety, as well as the neighbor's health and safety. Because like I said, I drove by there and thought, well, what's wrong with this? I don't see anything wrong, and rolled down the window and I could smell it immediately. So, these rats were getting out and getting to other people's yards, and dogs were killing them in other people's yards. I mean, it was a mess. So, I don't know. I just think that it's important to read what they're complaining about and address that issue rather than blowing it off completely. And then that person thinks that they've issued a complaint and it'll be taken care of. And then she has to, you know, complain again, or it's just frustrating.
Okay, well, number one, this case is being investigated. The email I sent you said this case is being currently assigned to the officer in this area for litter LRS violations. So it's not that they said nothing's happening and we're not going to do anything. And plus, these neighbors have been fighting for apparently 4 years. There have been 8 complaints filed against this property. They've all been investigated, and at least 4 of them have been found to be unfounded.
Right, that's what I was reading.
When they identify a complaint,
That's what I was reading, was the unfounded. So, you know, have they ever addressed the hoarding issue and the rodent issue, or do they just drive by and take pictures?
well, no, they don't drive by and take pictures. They go inspect the place. You know, so it's not fair to say that they just don't care. They don't pay any attention. They just blow it off without responding. But
What I'm saying is this has been going on for years, an issue of hoarding and an issue of rodents. So the reason possibly that you keep getting calls on this is because nobody is addressing the hoarding issue and the rodent issue.
the hoarding issue inside the house.
There's hoarding obviously going outside of the house. You can see it in the photo.
I'll be happy to forward the photographs that were sent to me today, and you can look.
It's in the photo is in the backyard.
Yeah.
It is obvious there's hoarding going on there. You can, I think Daryl has the photos. I sent those to him.
Well, if Daryl has them, maybe we can just pull them up and they can see.
Right.
Yeah.
And things shouldn't be judged on oh, well, I have to, this house is much better than the house that didn't have water, and the owners were throwing feces out the window for 3 years. I mean, you've got to address what they're complaining about. Otherwise, it just continues.
All right, that's the front of the house.
So just show the backyard.
Yeah, the address is 1311 Van Buren. Yeah, 1311 Van Buren. All right, so that's the back. You can't see it there a little bit. You can see some of the trash. The sun's.
You can see the entire back porch is full of stuff. What is so funny? I don't understand what's so funny about this, Nick.
Daryl? Okay, there's a photograph there.
Can I ask a question? Dan, where does personal property rights come in here? Dan not around?
No, I'm here. I'm always at your service.
Did you hear my question?
Well, we have a municipal code that regulates what people can do with their property. If there's a violation, they get a ticket, and then they can tell it to the judge. So it's hard in the abstract to answer that. People have the right to do what they want with their property up to a point. If you want less restrictions, then don't live in a city. In a city, neighbors have rights too. So we have a code, and the code says, you can't litter, you can't hoard. And I have been on calls with code enforcement for littering and for hoarding, and they're very aggressive, and they should be.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, the health department will actually try to get inside, because generally it's worse inside, and it's a huge issue for that person and the neighbors. But all I'm saying is that I don't think what she's complaining about has ever been actually addressed. Just like the rat house. And then also was just recently, you know, we had a house over in Bessemer on Evans, East Evans, where it gets, you know, the neighborhood's just not very pretty at all back in there. And a neighbor had called me about a house with a hole in the front yard, and she was worried. It smelled really bad, and she was worried that there could possibly be dead bodies in the hole just from the smell. So I had forwarded that information to Davenport, which a captain got back to me. He actually called and he said, yeah, an officer just went out there and he said that there's a hole, but there's no problem. And then he actually called me 15 minutes later, and he said that the hole was full of sewage, and he didn't know how the officer had missed that smell. So I just think, again, like on this property, when you talk about the neighbors fighting for years because it's the same problem. The rodent issue is not getting addressed, and neither is the hoarding. So that's all.
Okay. I think that I think it's a valid point for a counselor to represent their constituents' concerns. And I mean, if somebody is complaining that there's rats and trash and hoarding going on at somebody's house, it's our responsibility as counselors to bring that forward and to hope that we have the cooperation with city departments to make sure that those are investigated and taken care of. It sounds to me like this is being investigated.
It is, and it has.
And so I think until we find the conclusion of that investigation, we don't know how this is going to end up. But I wholeheartedly support Council Winter in bringing these forward and saying, you know, if it's not getting investigated, or if we don't think that it's happening in a way that's beneficial or advantageous to our constituents, then we need to bring it up, and we need to talk about that. So.
Right, and if you're not addressing what she's complaining about, you're wasting code enforcement's time, because they're going to continue to go out there and take pictures and say, oh, there's trash, when she's complaining about hoarding and rodents.
Right,
so it's just going to continue.
Yeah, and that we'll see how this investigation ends, and hopefully it ends well and everybody's happy. Anybody else? All right, we're adjourned.